multiple classes. Some of the times it's more lecture oriented. Some of the times it's more clips oriented. The Billy Wilder one, for example, we just went through a brief history of him, and we just went through a whole lot of his movies in detail. I wanted to tell that story of the 70s for those of you who saw that. I just had to get through it because I thought it was fascinating. The first class was very much talking and showing and going back and forth. This one, I want to talk briefly about how do you teach about documentaries. Well, it just so happens that there have been a couple of significant movements in documentaries. I'm going to focus mainly on documentaries from America, and then at the end, if I have time, I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite documentary, which is not American. But we're not going to go way back. We'll make references to Nanook of the North, which is actually a very important documentary. But we're really going to start and kind of where we started last week, which is counterculture. We're rolling now, Jimmy. Mm-hmm. Okay. Counterculture was important for the 70s because it dictated the types of movies that the audiences wanted to see and the filmmakers wanted to make. And similarly, there were some counterculture aspects to the way documentaries were made in the 60s. There's a concept called cinema verite. And let me see where I have it. Is that the end, Jack?
The list.
Yeah, pull that list up while I'm talking.
Yeah.
And one of the themes that just keeps coming out of this class is the back and forth between France and the United States in these movie terms. And it's so much of it comes from the critics. The directors come from the critics, as we saw last week. I can hardly count the amount of France to America and America to France, and then sometimes back again interactions we've seen just in this class so far. But here's another one. The 60s, it's a French term. Verite means truth, obviously. There's another formulation called direct cinema. We're not going to take the time to distinguish, except to say this. What is cinema verite, or often just called verite? The idea is truth. It's shooting what's there and not interfering with it as a filmmaker. And that's what was going on in the 60s. Direct cinema takes it a step further, and it's really fly-on-the-wall kind of cinema. And the filmmaker doesn't show up on camera at all. But they're not using techniques like voiceover narration, background music, which could influence the way you perceive the material. They're not even doing direct sort of talking head interviews. It's much more capture the reality that's there. And that's the way most documentaries are made. And as we go through it, it kind of becomes pretty dogmatic. This is how you make a documentary, and if you don't, it's not a documentary and it's not worthy. And then Errol Morris comes along. The next thing that happens, it's interesting, because a lot of these things happen in the late 80s. Errol Morris comes along and makes, one of the best documentaries that's ever been made, called The Thin Blue Line. And not only is it a brilliant documentary, still regarded as one of the greatest, but all those rules they had, it breaks them all. And it breaks them all in service of the truth. Okay? So it's a very controversial documentary, and it's been mimicked since. And I think there's always been this battle on two sides of the spectrum between how involved the filmmaker is in what's going on and what he or she is shooting, and how completely uninvolved. In '89, Ken Burns does the Civil War series, and just because he doesn't really do much to change the form of documentary. In fact, the thing that he's so smart about is he's able to, if any of you guys saw it, he's able to take these still photographs from 1860, the early mid-1860s, and make them come to life and dynamic. And what he did was he developed this technique for zooming in on something in the photograph and then scooting over to someone else and panning back. And now, if you ever make a video, and I've made videos for birthdays and people people move out of town, retirement parties or whatever, and when you're playing around with the software, the technique to do that is called the Ken Burns effect. Yeah, because it just works so well. But he's a popular historian. He's not an academic historian. Some of the academic historians quibble a bit with him, but in general, he's pretty right on in his history. And he did this stylistic technique that mattered, got tons of people interested. Then he did jazz, and he did baseball, and so I bring him up not because he changes the form, as much as he gets a lot of people interested in documentaries who weren't interested before. Then we get Michael Moore, who in his own way is really another groundbreaking kind of effect, because he does these techniques that we talk about Errol Morris throwing all the rules out the window. He and trying different approaches. Michael Moore's approach is to do the exact opposite and put himself in the middle of the film, and you know, have bias, have a point of view in his films. And some people said at the time, this isn't even a documentary, this is propaganda, this is docuganda. But certainly what he did, and with the popularity of it, it was an important force. And then the last, I think, significant thing that happens in the modern history of documentaries is, and I mentioned Sundance before, but some of the movies from Sundance, like Hoop Dreams, which we'll talk about, really caught on and got, because of some of these other movements, people were starting to get interested in documentaries. Well, Sundance is this huge breeding ground for documentaries, and now it just churns out lots of them, and it's had a big effect on getting these things popularized, and it does every year. It used to be when you go to Sundance, one or two of the movies from Sundance might get picked up and distributed broadly. Now, how many? Dozens? And certainly in the documentary format. So, I think there are a couple ways, there are a billion ways you could do out of what documentaries are like, but one way to think about it is, you've got some sort of broad social issue that's, maybe it's a social injustice, maybe it's well, actually, let me just give you 3 examples because I saw these. The first category would be the serious, meaningful social change type documentaries, like a conviction of a wrongly accused person, racial profiling in big city police departments, a documentary about an abused minority group somewhere in the world. The reason I chose those, all 3 of those, we just saw in January. We saw documentaries that fit each of those categories. So I think I'm going to skip down 2 because I want the place where I live next, Jack. I'm going to show, yeah, the house I live in. Yeah, go there and then play and pause. Okay, so
have to.
yeah, so here.
There you go.
So this first example is the socially conscious, important, meaningful, serious documentary that Laura was referring to, I think, when I was saying, what do you think of when you think of a documentary? So let's take a look at this clip. And one more thing, for almost all the documentaries I'm showing, I brought trailers. Just another movie nerd thing. They're called trailers because they used to be shown after the movies, and now we call them previews. A lot of people still call them trailers. There's a
Why were they shown after the movie?
Why were they?
What do you mean?
Well, they're called previews now because when you go to the Cineplex to watch Black Panther, you're going to find out what the upcoming shows are before you see the main attractions.
Yeah.
And back in the day,
You'd go to the movie and there was
it was
stuff after.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So that's where the term trailer comes from.
Yeah.
And the reason I picked trailers is it's a compact way to tell the story of what a movie's about. The downside is it's a marketing tool, so it doesn't always mimic the film style of the filmmaker, so we lose that a little bit. I'll talk about verite directors who won't use background music, and you'll hear some background music in the trailer. But I think in general it's an effective way to in a couple of minutes learn what a film's about. So here's that first category.
You have to understand the war on drugs has never been about drugs.
Oh, so good.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
What do you do when someone offers you drugs?
We intend to end the drug menace and to eliminate this dark, evil enemy within. Put them away where they belong.
And you are out. Somebody down the road said drugs are bad. Okay, there's no argument there. But think about where we are 30 years later.
I do what I have to do. I know how to survive. Yeah, I got some weed too.
The war against drugs is heating up.
I think they should have wrote prison guard on my forehead when I was born because it just fits me.
I say he's a criminal, let him go to prison.
I have a life for 30 years sentence, 20 years for drug trafficking. I have life without parole for 3 ounces of methamphetamine.
Of the 2,600 people I've sent to federal prison, I've seen 3 or 4 kingpins who are incarcerated poor people who are drug addicts.
You're watching poor, uneducated people be fed into a machine like meat to make sausage.
Law enforcement agents get rewarded in cash for the sheer numbers of drug arrests.
My money's over now. That's my money now.
The scale is unbelievable.
Nobody jails their population at the rate that we do.
All sorts of people get a financial interest.
Taser gun manufacturers, healthcare providers, phone companies.
You build the bed, they fill the bed. You'll get rich, and we'll get rich, and we'll all get rich together.
We are engaged in a great experiment. What happens when you take large numbers of people, remove them from their neighborhoods, their families? What does this do to the broader community?
The drug war is a holocaust in slow motion.
This is a war for all of it. I think people keep saying, well, that's about them. Well, no, it's about you.
All right, so give me a little light showing. This is one that anybody who sees it will be provoked by it, and it raises issue of mandatory minimum sentences. And that judge has other compelling bits in this piece. When he talks to one of the convicts who's going to be sentenced, and he said, I don't think you belong in prison for a long time. I think, if anything, you might deserve a short sentence, but my hands are tied. It's the legislative branch. It's really, for the lawyers, it's like a separation of powers kind of thing. The legislative branch has encroached, and what was going on decades ago is we were taking African American men from inner cities and urban areas and just taking them out of society and warehousing them for long periods of time for crack. And now what we're doing is we're taking men and women from rural settings across the country and pulling them out of society and warehousing them for decades for meth. And it's a story that people ought to be thinking about. This guy's an excellent documentarian, Eugene Jarecki, so is his brother. And that's, I think, what some people think about when they think about a documentary, but there's this other kind of documentary, and Jennifer and I talk about this all the time. It's you get to see this sort of what I'll call quirky microculture. And maybe it's a person. Usually it's a group. And it might be an extreme group. It's not fair to call quirky a white supremacist group. That's not harsh enough. But there are documentaries about religious cults. But sometimes you get these ones that are just about these strange setups. And we had one that we saw about competitive chicken breeders in New Zealand. Competitive New Zealand chicken breeders. And you start watching and you get drawn into this little world because it's competitive and the people care so much about it. They're blow drying their showbirds. But what happens is, like any good documentary, there's got to be more to it. And The fact is that this chicken breeding club in Christchurch, which has been around since the century before last, is going through some upheaval. So you watch this documentary and it sheds light on organizational dynamics and power and factionalism. So let's watch this preview, Jack.
I'm part of the Christchurch Poultry Club. I love chickens.
My friends probably describe me as different.
My wife says that I love them more than her.
Would you want to go in a pen with a heater on it, eh?
A bird knows when it's a good looking chicken, you know.
All the birds are judged to the New Zealand poultry standard.
We'll go with them.
Poultry show is very competitive.
I just love winning. You're the centre of attention. It's awesome.
The Christchurch Poultry Club has been going for 148 years. We're not allowed to.
I think duck should be replaced.
And they're going to try and overthrow them. Well, get off your butts and do it.
Are you trying to always get up your pecking order?
Unless we change and modernise, we're not going to be here in 20 years' time.
Yeah, there is a split in the club.
He wanted to be the kingpin at the national show.
People don't like being beaten.
Because of the politics going on in the club, we are concerned that some birds might be poisoned.
Best bird and show international. That's my ultimate goal.
This is what they're looking for, is the complete package. It's not rocket science really, is it?
You'll end up a pot roaster probably.
It's the end of the Christchurch Poultry Club. You beat me.
When you're at the top, there's always someone knocking you off the perch.
It's really exciting, isn't it?
It was not easy, you know, being a chook fancier.
So I can tell you that when you see something like this, and there are tons of them, can you give me a little light, Jimmy? You get I don't know, maybe it's a personal thing, but when Jennifer and I go and Jack, you get drawn into these worlds for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's compelling. And as I say, you can also get more profound understandings from them. Errol Morris, the guy who did The Thin Blue Line, I think it was the first thing he did was this movie, and Roger Ebert listed it as his one of his top 10 movies of all time. And it's a movie that when you see it, you'll never forget it. And it's called Gates of Heaven. It's the aptly named Gates of Heaven, and it's about owners of a pet cemetery who are going through crisis. And it's just something like this. The reason it's interesting is you meet these quirky people, and interesting things happen that reveal things about the human condition. All right, so I think the best way to go about it is for me to, for the next 15, 20 minutes, kind of show you examples of verite filmmaking, and then the more interactive version by Roger Moore. And then we'll show a clip from a Sundance film. And then we'll just spend a little time going through these previews and letting you get a sense of the range and expanse of the form. So, do we have the clip for Titty Cut Follies up after this? I think we have all the clips together. So go down to the clip for Titty Cut Follies. Yeah, and before you started, that is, and Titty Cut Follies. I don't like the name because you don't know what to make of it. That's actually, I think maybe it's an Indian name for a nearby river, but this was a Yale Law School grad who became a Boston University Law School professor. And he, after he served in the military, came out and worked, and he knew about this Institute for the Criminally Insane outside of Cambridge, I think it was, or outside of Boston, I'm sorry. And so he was probably, when I was talking about the distinction between verite and direct, even more direct, fly on the wall, no interaction, just filming what's going on. So this is a guy, this film, Titty Cut Follies, is a pretty famous film. It's got some harrowing footage, which I'm not going to show, like force feeding and some abuse of the patients. And when it came out, it was banned, and I know that sounds unusual in our First Amendment type jurisprudence. They made an argument, the Massachusetts state courts, that the filmmaker had not gotten the consents of the patients, and that this was really a privacy right thing, but it wasn't. He'd gotten all the consents, and the thinking was that the state of Massachusetts, which ran this Institute for the Criminally Insane, wanted to kind of suppress it because of some of the problems they had. And then ultimately, many years later, an appeals court overturned it, and now you can see it. But I just want to show a little bitty clip, and this is a guy, I think he's Russian or somewhere from the Soviet republics, and he's learned English, and he's stuck in this criminally insane hospital, and he wants to go back to prison. He's sort of the opposite of Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which we saw before, who went from prison to this place.
What year did this come?
This is what's it, Jack? 69.
So early 70s.
67. All the verite films we're going to show are 67, 69, 76 is the last one.
This movie's pretty fucked up.
Well, I'm not showing the part I'm showing.
Excuse my French.
No. The part I'm showing just gives you a sense of how it was filmed, and he's before board. He's before board arguing, "Let me go back to prison," and they're going to have none of it. So this is a very short clip. So go ahead, John.
Vladimir, as I promised you before, if I see enough improvement in you.
But how can I improve if I'm getting worse? I'm trying to tell you, day by day, I'm getting worse. Because of the circumstances, because of the situation. Now you tell me, how can you see an improvement? Each time I get worse. So obviously it's the treatment that I'm getting, or the situation, or the place, or the patients, or the inmates. Or I do not know which. Oh, I want to go back to the person where I belong. I was supposed to only come down here for observation. What observation did I get? You call me up a couple of times, you say, well, take some medication for the mind. I'm supposed to take medication for if I have some bodily injury, not for the mind. My mind is good. Because I'm obviously logical, I know what I'm talking about, there's nothing, and I am excited. Yes, that's the only fault you might find with me, and I have a perfect right to be excited. I've been here for a year and a half. And this place is doing me harm. I come in here, every time I come in here, you tell me I look crazy. Now, what's if you don't like my face, that's another story. But that has nothing to do with my mental stability.
Right. So this woman here, and then the gentleman who spoke before, these are people who are going to be making decisions about whether or not he stays. And sure enough, they think he's crazy, and they need to give him more medicine. And
why is he there? What did he do?
I don't know. I don't know.
Who knows? It's like these people shouldn't really be there in the first place.
I mentioned Frederick Wiseman. The Maysles brothers are another two important figures. They made, Albert and David Maysles made some movies that were verite. And this one, Gimme Shelter, they made with a woman whose name escapes me at the moment. But as you can see in that one, that was kind of fly on the wall. And you watch the whole thing, it's all fly on the wall. Pretty much the same with these guys. What they did is they said to the Stones, who were doing concerts in 1969 in Madison Square Garden, can we tape your tour? And the Stones said, sure. And this turns into the ugliest story, because people complain that the Rolling Stones are charging too much money for the tickets in Madison Square Garden and some other places. And so Mick Jagger says, all right, we'll do a free concert like Woodstock, which happened not long before the concert that these guys did at Altamont. There's Woodstock, there's Monterey Pop Festival, there's Altamont later in 1969. And the difference between this and Woodstock is that in Woodstock, they had months and months and months to plan it. And there were town council votes on where it was going to be, and they had posters that made up saying it was in Woodstock, and then it ends up in Max Yasgur's farm somewhere else. But, you know, if you've seen the movie Woodstock or followed it at all, as crazy and logistically challenged as it ended up being, it does end up viewed as a pretty positive and peaceful, you know. One of the things you always hear is there were 1 or 2 births and no deaths at Woodstock. And those numbers don't work out the same way at Altamont. Part of the problem, the biggest problem was poor planning. They didn't have time to do it. And Woodstock was planned over months. The Altamont concert was planned over days and was going to have Jefferson Airplane and Santana and Grateful Dead and the Stones. And there was another like physical part of it that if they'd had more time to think about it, they would have figured out. Instead of having the stage kind of up on a hill, it was down in a depression. So you've got a size almost as big as Woodstock. This was 300,000 people, and the stage at the bottom, so everybody's like pushing to get down there. So you're going to have a natural sort of problem. And then the kicker is that they hire the Hells Angels.
Hells Angels, right?
Yeah.
To be
Now,
like
there's a little bit of a
security.
misconception. Well, there's a little bit of a misconception about it that Mick Jagger hired the Hells Angels to be the security. That's not what happened. What happened was they needed some kind of security. The Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane had worked with Hells Angels before, and they hired them not to be the police so much as to say, look, you guys sit on the front of the stage. We know these crowds are going to be coming at us. You guys sit on the front of the stage, and we'll give you all the beer you want, and nobody will try to get over top of you. And it was a very dumb idea that the Stones road manager came up with in a pinch. You know, the Hells Angels show up like Hells Angels, heavily armed and with weighted pool cues. And ultimately, it starts to get ugly, and there are fights breaking out, and there are fights with the Angels, and then this one guy who's pumped up on speed and methamphetamines tries to rush the stage, and they push him back, and then he pulls out a gun, and as soon as he pulls out a gun, the Hells Angels jump on him and stab him to death. And those of us who follow rock documentaries, we've seen this, and there's a famous picture of the Hells Angels doing this. But that's how it ended. Now the interesting thing is, you got the Maisels brothers doing this sort of direct cinema approach. They're capturing everything, and they don't even know they've got the footage. It's like a week later, this becomes part of a criminal trial. That Hells Angel who did the stabbing got off on self-defense grounds, but they didn't even realize they had the evidence until they were back in New York looking at the footage. So the first thing I want to show you, there are 2 clips from Gimme Shelter. The first one, which is a little bit of an omen about how things might go, is a clip of a radio station helicopter bringing the Rolling Stones to the concert, which is kind of going on. And so you can see the scope of the crowd. And then when Mick gets out, Mick and Mick Taylor and Charlie Watts, they get out, and Keith Richards, they're walking to their trailer, and somebody just punches Mick Jagger and knocks him over. And then he stands up, and they get to the trailer, and you know, things weren't looking good, and this was not the peace sticks. It was the first clip. Look how big this crowd is.
Yeah, it's a cool shot. Very cool shot. The one who, yeah. But in between him coming down and walking to his trailer.
Yeah, so it just knocks him over.
Yeah.
And then there's another little funny bit I'm not going to show you here, but it just kind of cracks me up because it's a Grateful Dead thing. And the Grateful Dead were one of the important founders of the show. And Marty Balin of Jefferson Airplane gets knocked out by one of the Hells Angels. And so there's this little clip of Jerry Garcia walking up and he's got his poncho. He's asking what's going on. And they're saying that it's violent and one of the musicians got hit. And he's like, bummer, man. And then he just turns around and walks away and they don't play the show at all.
No, I remember seeing that. You knew it was totally uncool.
No, I'm not going to show you guys the, you can see it if you want to, not tonight. No, hit pause. I didn't grab it, chat. It's right before this. What happened is a guy, pulls the gun and then a Hell's Angel jumps on him and starts stabbing him and it's over. And you can see Mick Jagger doesn't know what's going on. He's seeing scuffles everywhere. But the reason I want to show this next bit, and I just thought this was so memorable the first time I saw it, is it switches from, no, we're gonna show that bit. I just didn't want to show the stabbing, so this is after the stabbing. So hold on a second.
I'm not playing anything.
Okay, so what you're gonna see is the very end, right after the stabbing, and then it cuts directly to, there's actually an audio bridge, you might remember from the first class, or it's a direct audio strip of Mick's voice saying, can you run that back, David? And Mick Jagger is watching the killing for the first time. And you see that. And the directors, as always, are just captured on film. And so, let's go back and play that clip, Jack, and you'll see it.
Hey people, come on, let's be cool. People, please. There's no reason to hassle anybody. Please don't do that. So are those jackets Hells Angels over there?
If you move back and sit down, we can continue, and we will continue.
Can you roll back on that, David?
Now this is Mick first seeing the guy get stabbed.
I'm afraid it's alright. It's alright.
And Mick, to lights up a little bit, Mick is, if you watch a little bit more of Gimme Shelter, you'll see he put this thing together, he's trying to make it work. The Hells Angels really weren't his idea, but he's trying to get the people to do what they're supposed to. So you can see, he feels a certain measure of responsibility for this, but at the same time, he didn't try to do anything wrong. And the guy got stabbed to death, had a gun, and a lot of people thought he was trying to shoot the band. So it was a very ugly situation, but a brilliant example of just standing back and letting the events speak for themselves without any sort of narrative input. I think the most acclaimed verite film is a film made by Barbara Koppel. Jennifer and I saw Barbara Koppel, I can't even remember the festival. I think it was Sundance a couple years ago, and it was about this lefty magazine called The Nation that used to be extremely important, and now it's gone out of business. And she's still doing her thing. This is her most famous film. She won the Academy Award for this. It's very highly critically acclaimed. Harlan County, USA. And it's about a coal miner strike in 1975, 76 in eastern Kentucky, and how violent things get. And one of the key skills of a documentarian is access. Well, the goal is access, the skill is trust building. And she went down from New York and had nothing in common with these eastern Kentucky coal miner types, but she spent time and embedded herself with them, much as Sean Baker does, who makes dramatic films like The Florida Project. Goes and meets people and immerses himself, and they kind of trust him and open up to him, and he learns things. That's what she did. And she went down originally to make a film about it was about a union election, and then this strike happens, and she's right in the middle of it, and she's facing violence herself. Let's just watch this clip, because it speaks for itself.
Come on, young killer, brave and fine. Think about your fortune way down in mine.
Harlan, Kentucky is coal country, where men work long hours for short wages, where poverty, black lung, and needless disaster are facts of life. In 1973, the men voted to join the United Mine Workers Union. The company refused to sign the contract, and so began the Battle of Harlan County, USA.
Which side are you on?
Without organization, you're a lone individual, without influence, and without recognition of any kind.
They're treating us like that we're animals, dogs. Well, we aren't. We're American citizens.
Is it a fact that the Duke Power Company maintains housing for its employees that has no water and no indoor plumbing?
Yes, sir. We were attempting to move our people into trailers, upgrade our people into better housing.
We'll sit there and sweat when it's snowing. We'll stand right there until that UMWA contract is signed at Brookside.
We have made them dozens and dozens of proposals. All of our life, we've been kicked around, we've been put in jail, we've been shot at, we've got dynamite thrown at us, and then you don't want us to have nothing. Well, I tell you, Mr. Horn, I'm going to be standing right there on that picket line looking at you just as long as it takes. We're not going to have the violence of the 30s.
My father was a coal miner who was killed in the mines, and my husband and me was in the strike in the 30s in bloody Harlan County, and I do mean it is bloody too. They're about, well, by God, you fight far with far.
We can hold, but we can't hold all the guns like that. That electricity burning over there, there's somebody dying every day for it.
If I get shot, they can't shoot the union out of me.
Take the shelter if you can and lay the lead to them.
Oh, yeah.
The New York Times says it's a fascinating and moving work. Q magazine calls it supercharged excitement. It's powerful, provocative, exciting, and frightening because it's real. Harlan County, USA.
It's over. Yeah, and that guy driving by in the red truck, that gun was aimed at if I remember correctly, right at Barbara Koppel and her crew. So that's verite. Now we take a huge jump in a different direction with the thin blue line. And instead of characterizing how it's different, I think I want to just show it to you. So let's look at the trailer for Errol Morris's acclaimed The Thin Blue Line.
Oh, I saw it 2 days ago. It's absolutely amazing. Right, this way. So sad.
These are reenactments.
I'd run away from home a couple times, once or twice.
This guy, by the way, is the one who killed that cop.
It's a sneaky little weevil.
And it was his gun that was used to kill the cop. And after he killed the cop, he went to his friends and he bragged about killing the cop. So let's keep going.
And this all started David running away from home. Takes, I took
He killed more people after he killed the
my
cop.
dad's in the shotgun.
And before.
Took a neighbor's car and broke in their house or something. We got the keys to it. I forget exactly what it was. Ended up coming to Dallas. I'm driving down some street somewhere in Dallas. I just turned 16. There was a guy where I think he ran out of gas. I took him to get some gas. This was Randall Adams. Ended up following him to his room where him and his brother were staying. Eventually that afternoon, we went out and got some beer and what have you, and we smoked a little marijuana and what have you. Went to a movie that night.
I get up, I go to work on Saturday.
And this guy, Randall Adams, is the one who gets arrested and convicted of capital murder in Texas. And I think what the police just got the wrong guy. And then I think through confirmation bias, they became increasingly convinced that they had the right guy. But there are horrible miscarriages of justice throughout this thing, including a woman, the key, the key woman who is the direct evidence, personal identification witness against him, committed perjury. And when they first showed the lineup, including this guy, she picked someone else. So he had everything going against him, but keep playing, Jack.
Now, why did I meet this kid? I don't know. Why did I run out of gas at that time? I don't know. But it happened. It happened. The day they picked me up, December 21st, they took me upstairs. What floor, I don't know, but they put me in a little room.
Get ready to pause. Pause here, Jack. So now, right here, we're breaking the verite dogma, because not only do we have a reenactment, but they're using some of those techniques we've talked about before. A low camera angle makes a subject appear intimidating. So this cop seems scary to us. The music is another manipulative tool to make us seem scared of this cop as he was an actor who's walking up to this table. All right, so go ahead, Jack.
Gus Rhodes walked in. He had a confession there he wanted me to sign. He said that I would sign it. He didn't give a damn what I said. I would sign this piece of paper he's got. I told him I couldn't.
I had what I call a casual, friendly conversation with him to start with, to try to size him up, to see what he liked and what he didn't like. And I found almost immediately that he didn't have very much conscience, that anything he had done, it never really bothered him. He had done other things.
He over-protested his innocence.
Didn't seem to bother him in the least.
He showed no expression whatsoever. It's just like that he's sitting here talking about the color of this wall or the shooting of the police officer. He showed no.
And he's wrongly accused, remember?
No reaction to any of the questions.
He, of course, almost overacted his innocence. He protested that he hadn't done anything. Couldn't imagine why we were bringing him in. He didn't fight or he didn't resist. He just protested his innocence.
All right, so I think, Jack, where I want to skip to next is Roger and me. No, one above that one. finally started Roger me while I talk about it. So I mentioned this to you briefly. The topic of Roger and Me, if you don't know, is the depressed economy of Flint, Michigan, and the auto industry. And Michael Moore blames this all on he blames it all on the automakers, and it's, you know, the pursuit of profits at the expense of people. And again, as I said, this movie's very far from the verite approach. He makes himself a big part of the story. So I want to show you this one clip. Hang on one second. If you can't find it, I've got two. But there are two things that make this, two things that make Roger and Me interesting. One is that, let's see if this one is that it's
As the attack took place, Mr. Bush was on his way to an...
Oh, yeah, that's Michael Moore talking.
All right, well, actually, let me back up for a second. Let me back up for a second, okay? Because he makes Roger and Me, and when Roger and Me comes out, you guys are familiar with that movie, right? And it's interesting to me for two reasons. It's interesting to me for two reasons. One is, it's the first time I'd seen a documentary, and this got a lot of play. I had a friend who was from a suburb of Flint. He went and watched it near Flint, and he was like kind of crouched down in the back of the seat. But it was very popular. There were two things about it that made it sort of like shook me as a documentary watcher. The first one was, I thought, this is the first time I've seen a documentary that doesn't even pretend to be even-handed and balanced. He had his point of view, which is that the corporations were the bad guys, and this was an easy story. He didn't really, some of his facts were wrong, and he had some misleading time frames, and he adjusted some things for dramatic effect. But again, the first part of it that felt strange was that it didn't feel like a PBS sort of even-handed documentary that I was familiar with. And then the second thing about it, which was equally memorable, is that it was just funny as hell. And going into Flint, we got some of the same sorts of things that good documentarians find in any of these other cultures. And one of the examples, he finds all these people who are poor and trying to figure out what to do about it because they've lost their assembly line jobs. So this woman, as you can see, it says rabbits or bunnies, pets or meat.
Pets or, underlined.
Pets or meat, dressed for sale. So let's watch the clip with her.
I saw the sign down on the street that said you're selling rabbits and bunnies here.
Yeah.
For sale.
You want pets or meat?
Pets or meat? You meaning I can buy the bunnies to have as a pet, or I can buy them for
Meat. They're already dressed and clean.
I butcher the babies when the babies reach 4 or 5 months old.
Well, that's good.
You see, if you butcher the older ones like these guys, then they're stewers.
Mm-hmm.
They're not fryers.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people like fryers better than they do the stewers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I keep my own personal stock, and then when my babies get 4 or 5 months old and I have 15, 20 babies, you gotta get rid of them some way.
Yeah, that's true.
If you don't sell them as pets, you gotta get rid of them as meat. You guys are all meat. But see, they start doing this to each other.
What's that?
Peeing on each other and stuff like that when they get older. And if you don't have 10 separate cages for them, then they start fighting. And then the males will castrate the other males. And they chew their balls right off. Then you have a bloody mess. So that's why you gotta butcher them when they get a certain age, or you have a heck of a mess. I'm on Social Security, and the only other income I have is my rabbits for groceries.
Now, if he's trying to make as he obviously is, trying to make a political point, query, what's the best way to go about it? I want to show you the next clip, which is a famous clip from Fahrenheit 9/11. And you may be familiar with the My Pet Goat story, but we're going to watch the clip of when George W. Bush learns about the second plane going into the World Trade Center and what he does about it while he's reading a book called My Pet Goat. And I want you to watch how Michael Moore handles it, and then we'll talk
As
about
the
a
attack
different
took
approach.
place, Mr. Bush was on his way to an elementary school in Florida. When informed of the first plane hitting the World Trade Center, where terrorists had struck just 8 years prior, Mr. Bush decided to go ahead with his photo opportunity.
Read this for the faster way to get ready. Yes, ma'am. Get ready? Yeah. Okay, get ready to read the words on this page without making a mistake.
When the second plane hit the tower, his chief of staff entered the classroom and told Mr. Bush, the nation is under attack. Not knowing what to do, with no one telling him what to do, and no Secret Service rushing in to take him to safety, Mr. Bush just sat there and continued to read My Pet Goat with the children. Nearly 7 minutes passed with nobody doing anything. As Bush sat in that Florida classroom, was he wondering if maybe he should have shown up to work more often? Should he have held at least one meeting since taking office to discuss the threat of terrorism with his head of counterterrorism? Or maybe Mr. Bush was wondering why he had cut terrorism funding from the FBI. Or perhaps he just should have read the security briefing that was given to him on August 6, 2001, which said that Osama bin Laden was planning to attack America by hijacking airplanes. But maybe he wasn't worried about the terrorist threat because the title of the report was too vague.
I believe the title was Bin Laden Determined to Attack Inside the United States.
A report like that might make some men jump, but as in days past, George W. just went fishing. As the minutes went by, George Bush continued to sit in the classroom. Was he thinking, I've been hanging out with the wrong crowd? Which one of them screwed me? Was it the guy my daddy's friends delivered a lot of weapons to? Was it that group of religious fundamentalists who visited my state when I was governor? Or was it the Saudis? Damn, it was them. I think I better blame it on this guy.
All right, so my take is, if he's trying to meet the objective of making a political point, I think he's overplayed his hand. I've seen, imagine this same footage of Bush at the school with Frederick Wiseman as the director, or the Maisels brothers. And I've seen some clips like that. And I think that instead of injecting a lot of his polemics and arguments and facts, and you don't really know how they took counterterrorism money away from the FBI, did they give it somewhere else, I think he muddies the issue. And it would have been more powerful filmmaking to have spent more time on Bush and let the clock turn. But that's how he makes films. I don't think it matters that much whether you consider what he does a documentary. He's a provocateur. All right, Sundance, great breeding ground for, do I have a breeding back? When Sundance is a great, we'll skip that. Great breeding, yeah, great breeding ground for these documentaries. This is an example. This guy, Steve James, is from Oak Park, and really he did the same thing that Barbara Koppel did. He got access through trust. He got to know these kids in the ghettos who played basketball, and found some pretty fascinating stories in them. And this is one that really touched a lot of people's hearts and sort of stood for Sundance documentary. So let's watch this one, Jack.
I can't promise you where you're going to go, if you're going to be a star. You're going to get hit, you're going to get knocked down, you're going to get banged around. You can make something of your life. That's what it's all about.
Hope Dreams, the true story.
All right, give me a light, Jimmy. So now that we've gone through those sort of movements, verite, interactive, and so forth, now in the spirit of direct filmmaking, I'm going to show just a few with very little interference on my part, except for a couple I'll make comments about. And we'll just let you see what some of these topics are like.
Before you go to that, the same filmmaker just debuted Sundance this year, a new documentary about OPRF.
Yeah.
That's coming out. Looks fascinating.
Right, and deals with
the Hoop Jim's guy.
Yeah, and deals with
Hoop
the
Jim's
question.
great.
And deals with a question called the minority achievement gap, and why certain minority students will have the same test scores and skills and grades, and then just can't seem to keep up with their majority counterparts. And that's been turned into, I think, a 6-hour documentary that is going to show. I'm not sure where, but Steve James is a wonderful documentary, and we're lucky to have him in town. And these will bob back and forth between the serious social issues and the quirky microculture. So let's just watch a few. This is one of Jen's favorites.
It's almost impossible to photograph in the red light district. It's a whole separate society within itself. I mean, you just walk down that one lane and it's another world. And of course, as soon as I entered the brothels, I met the children. They were all over me, and I would play with them and take their photographs, and they would take mine. That's when I thought it would be really great to teach them and to see this world through their eyes.
From the perspective of 8 children, led by the compassion of one woman.
Take your time to look and make sure everything in the whole square looks good. She's really good at photographing on the street because she's very strong. The children ask me for help. They ask for it all the time. I mean, there's so little I can do. All I can do is try. There's so much information in this picture. It's just a beautiful photograph. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a teacher even. But without help, they're doomed. These kids want to be out of there. Are there any boarding schools that will take them? No place is the right place. Nobody will take them.
From the streets of Calcutta
My goal now is to raise money for them using their own photography.
to an auction block at Sotheby's.
Are you excited? Yes.
Oh, they're all here. Amazing.
I think he's reached a critical point, and if he doesn't get out of there really soon, he's lost. You and you and you have been accepted into a school.
8 children
People ask me, why do I come and do this work? There's no rational reason.
born into brothels. Learn to see, learn to create, learn to hope. Think Film presents the story of a courageous vision and the children who made it happen. Born into brothels.
This is just too great. This one. Hilarious.
My name is David Siegel.
My name is Jacqueline Siegel.
It's just so ridiculous.
I am the founder and CEO of the largest timeshare company in the world.
I'm a 43-year-old mother of 8.
I thought she was the most beautiful girl in the world.
It took me a while to fall in love with him.
We had a great relationship.
There's 30 years between us, but he doesn't need Viagra. At least there is that option if he does, like, I don't know, 10 years from now. We never sought out to build the biggest house in America. It just kind of happened.
It's bigger than the White House. 2 tennis courts,
30 bedrooms,
full-size baseball field,
10 kitchens,
antique furniture.
90,000 square feet.
Oh my God.
No, that's not my room. That's my closet.
Nothing's really normal about this life.
They're in line to do $1 billion in sales for the year. They're on top of the world. And they came to a screeching halt.
The market fell over 700 points.
I would say it's touch and go right now.
We don't talk about financial problems. I guess I'll have to watch the movie to find out what's going on in my life.
When everything changes. This is almost like a riches to rags story. She knows we need to cut back, but she's still compulsive.
Sit down.
Well, if I could afford a watch, I would tell you. Bankers are like vultures.
Our big problem is Vegas.
Our lenders have made it very clear that he'll have more money than he knows what to do with. He can go back to building his house if he turns over this building.
Over my dead body.
You can buy the palace that timeshare mogul David Siegel already wants to sell.
Just think of the bright side. You might not have to clean this house.
The American dream is raising way up above what you started with, and that is what she has done.
When you're down is when you find out who your true friends are.
You get strength from your marriage?
No.
I'm in this fantasy world, you know, until reality hits.
From the White House, we present Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Good evening, my fellow.
This is the same guy, Eugene Jarecki. His brother Andrew is a great documentary filmmaker, and he's the one who made the one we saw before, The Place Where I Live.
And the one about, the HBO one about,
Robert Durst.
You're Robert Durst, there you go. Yeah, The Jinx. That's what Andrew Jarecki made. Fantastic.
Of Americans. In the councils of government, we must guard against the military-industrial complex.
The United States is the greatest force for good in the world. We have not an obligation to go out and start wars, but certainly to spread democracy and freedom throughout the world.
The defense budget is $750 billion. Profits went up last year well over 25%. When war becomes that profitable, you're going to see more of it.
There is a huge flow of cash into defense industry. $66 billion for our men and women in uniform. $100 million to upgrade 10 additional B-1 bombers.
You do have to follow the money.
It's the representative's duty to bring home the bacon. God bless our contract.
Now, kids are dying. Billions are being spent every month.
And the American people are scratching their heads going, how do we get it?
This is not about one president or one party.
When does the United States go from a force for good to a force of imperialism?
We've got an empire. There is no excuse for 725 American military bases in 130 foreign countries.
I think numbers almost are distracting.
9/11 showed us war can be privatized, destruction can be privatized. What we are risking is the republic itself.
Collusion is our business. Collusion with the military. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
It is nowhere written that the American empire goes on forever.
From the White House, we
Okay, so give me a little ice, Jimmy. I just want to say, I've been the fly on the wall. I do want to make one comment though, and that's about sometimes there's two of the films we're going to show. This one which I think was made by D.A. Pennebaker. We'll see another film documentarian. I should have mentioned he's one of the greats. But this one blew my mind because of the access. It's called The War Room, and it's about when Bill Clinton was running against George H.W. Bush and Ross Perot, and what's his name, the Raging Cajun? James Carville and George Stephanopoulos worked together to get Bill Clinton elected, and they give the filmmaker incredible access. So it's this, you really get a sense of whatever your position on who you wanted to get elected, that you've learned a lot about how this particular president got elected. And you won't see it as much in this this trailer, but one of the things, it's like any trial you've been on, any big deal you've been on, any campaign you've been on, there are these huge ups and downs, and everything's over, and then it starts, and so he's dealing with Jennifer Flowers, and then all this crazy stuff, and you're with him the whole way. The exciting last night when they win, the footage got lost and they couldn't put it in the film. But watch this one with an eye toward the access that they had.
President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. In the councils of government, we must guard against the military.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, D.A. Pennebaker's Don't Look Back and Monterey Pop captured the legends of rock and roll. Now, D.A. Pennebaker and Chris Hedges bring us the making of the first president from the rock and roll generation.
Somebody who's been through a lot of tough elections, James Carville is known as the Raging Cajun in the business.
So let me tell you what's at stake in this election. Just about George Bush and the whole sleazy little cabal of them. You're going to get tax breaks for the wealthy. You're going to get a guy that doesn't know what a grocery store scanner is. I'm getting sick and tired. I am every single night hearing one of these carping little liberal Democrats jumping all over my you know what.
I'm George Stephanopoulos. I'm Director of Communications.
Bush was on the defensive. Another good night for Bill Clinton. 3 debates, 3 wins. I guarantee you that if you do this, you'll never work in Democratic politics again.
If we cannot believe anything he has said about his past, how can we believe anything he's saying about the future?
Well, I think Mary Mallon's got a good career in fiction writing when this is over.
I'm lost. I don't know where I'm supposed to go next.
Turn Perot off. I don't want to look at it. How are you? Nice to see you.
Stay focused. Talk about things that matter to people.
We love Hillary's new patriotism thing.
It's the economy, stupid.
Speak from your heart tonight. I mean, that's all that matters.
Read my lips. Just the most famous broken promise in the history of American politics.
And spin. We will win.
You so yesterday, if I think of an old calendar, I think of George Bush's face on it.
Landslide.
I like the way this thing feels.
They changed the way campaigns are won. The War Room, from D.A. Pennebaker and Chris Hedges.
This is just the most American thing you can do.
My name is Scott Michael Roberts. This is my wife, Kimberly Roberts. We're from New Orleans, the main war, underwater.
This guy, I've just got to say, Jennifer and I were here when this won Best Documentary at Sundance, and we were down like near the front row, and they come out, and you're right in front. This guy's a hero, and his wife had bought this $25 video camera right before Katrina hit, and they stayed, and she filmed it, and she ends up getting film writer credit for this award-winning documentary. They're poor as dirt. They have absolutely nothing. People were so happy for him. She was pregnant, went out to Salt Lake City and had her baby there. But he takes, I can't remember if it's in this clip or not, but at one point he takes a heavy bag that the boxers box with and uses it as a device that people can hang on to get back into their houses and get to safety until they're rescued. And then some New York police came down and met them when they were figuring out what to do when the storm was over. But she got this incredible footage, so keep going, Ken.
Yeah. This really hits you in the face. This.
The sky looks pretty nice, but it sure soon will change.
Turn on, here's some thunder.
Golly, look at that water, boy! witness. Hey, help us get off the roof, man. You're a real hero, boy. We under siege, truly under siege. Everybody done lost everything around here. Now you have seen what Katrina has done to us. She has stuck us in the attic. I'm running out of juice too. These houses have not been inspected yet. There could be dead people right now as we speak. Because the National Guard, they have not been here. And it's 2 weeks after the hurricane.
This is one of the Navy bases that Bush had planned to pull down.
Why can't we stay overnight?
This will blow your mind. He walks up. He's this guy who's just trying to save lives. And there's these empty, federally owned naval bases, completely empty, that they need shelter for, the women and the sick children. And so he just walks up and asks them. And gets denied. Go ahead.
What about the women and children? They say get off our property or we gonna start shooting.
We don't need you out here if you try to trouble the water.
I don't want to raise your expectations too high.
My son wanted to join the army. You're not gonna fight for a country that does not give a damn for you.
Don't come to our town if you try to trouble the water.
The hood always be there to be fixed. I'm living life after Katrina. It's hard out here.
You gonna make it,
okay? We all gonna make it.
Stop hustling, they gon' trouble the water. I got that because they can't.
I urge the citizens to continue to listen to the local authorities.
It's our home, our food, our neighbors, our problem. That's where I want to be at.
All right, so give me some lights. It's funny, she had that camera and she went over to her neighbor, she went over to her uncle who was sitting on a stoop and he was kind of drunk and she said, look, you gotta get out of here. And he didn't heed her warning and he died. But it was actually an inspirational affirmation and story of hope for this particular family because they were able to get the money from this movie and get out of that war. Now, we have 2 more to go over, and the next one, I talked about the access of the war room. This one blew my mind. As a lawyer, this guy gets charged with a crime. And there's something about criminal trials that are inherently dramatic. Drama inheres in a criminal trial in our system. And this guy, his wife died. He says she fell down a staircase and banged her head. And he gets arrested for murder. Yeah, he gets arrested for murdering her, and all these crazy. And this is really one that stands for the proposition that the truth is stranger than fiction. If you haven't seen this, you've got to see it because Jennifer and I were just addicted to this until we saw the end of it. And they claim that he hit her over the head, and she claims that she fell back, and then these wild things happen. Like they've got these daughters, and the daughters he got are adopted daughters from Germany, and their mother was friends with him, and they're his adopted daughters because they don't have any mother anymore. This comes out during why don't they have a mother anymore? Because she fell down a staircase in Germany.
No.
Yes.
Oh, it's so bad.
And the German police looked at it and they said that had nothing to do, there was not a homicide here. She had some brain issue and fell down, but truth is stranger than fiction. But that's not why I'm showing it to you. I'm not showing it to you because it's a great documentary you got to see, which is also true. I'm showing it because, for whatever reason, and I would never in 1,000 years have done this, the lawyers, and I guess he insisted on it, the client, the lawyers give the filmmakers complete access. And so it's strategy and all this stuff is, you're messing up the attorney-client privilege and it could come out to hurt you. But we get the inside story of the plaintiff's side of a criminal defense and appeal and so forth. Let's just watch this trailer, and then we'll talk about the last one. You gotta watch this.
Michael Peterson's supporters can't believe he's charged with the murder of his wife, Kathleen. The charge, first-degree murder.
Jean told me, I think this is a good story, but I can only do it if I believe this is.
It's a strange case because you don't know, is it a murder or is it an accident? Michael Peterson was a kind of Shakespearean character.
This case is no more and no longer about Kathleen. Truth is lost in all of this now. Truth is of no meaning whatsoever.
We really started filming in January 2002. It was only 6 weeks after Kathleen's death.
Turn 911, what emergency? 1810 Cedar Street, please. What's wrong? My wife's got an accident. She's due breathing. What kind of accident? Downstairs. She's due breathing. Please, can you get conscious?
My purpose was to have a crew following the defense case and another crew following the prosecution. We met the district attorney, Jim Harlan.
This case is about pretense and appearances.
And his assistant, Freda Black.
This is called hardcore.
There was a point when I decided that we had a film. Michael Peterson was not prosecuted because of the evidence, but because of the kind of man he was.
Mr. Peterson was bisexual.
When I started filming, I was quite convinced that at the end I will know about him. But after 2 years and a half, I cannot say for sure.
Did he do it or not? The Staircase returns Monday at 10 on Sundance Channel.
All right, give me a light, Jimmy. Before I talk about the final documentary, I want to say there are a couple of others like this one, if you like this format. This is The Staircase. There's another, and this one I got to say, you know, Jennifer and I disagreed about whether we believed the guy was guilty. Who knows? There's another one like that, and it's a documentary called Capturing the Freedmans. And there are allegations of child molestation by this family in, I think they're in upstate New York, and he teaches computer science lessons to these kids. And you watch it and you just can't tell. Another one, I told. Sorry. And then there's another one that's, you can't rent it, it's on PBS. I'm going to send you the links to all these, of course. And it's one of the most compelling documentaries I've ever seen. It's about the Little Rascals Daycare Center in North Carolina. And these kids initially said that nothing had happened to them, and the police pursued and psychiatrists worked with them, and then they started having these recovered memories of having been molested, and a lot of people spent time in prison who really shouldn't have. That's another great one. Along the same line. All right, so the one we're going to talk about last is, we're going to talk about it because, not because it follows any of these movements, because it's my favorite documentary, and I think it's the greatest documentary that's ever been made. It's called The Sorrow and the Pity. People make jokes about it because it's long, but I think it's just, there are jokes in Annie Hall about it. And there was a reissue of the movie, Woody Allen talked about The Sorrow and the Pity and what an important movie it is. Now, why is it important and what's it about? Well, every nation has its myths. Every nation has its myths. And it used to be in our history books in the 60s as fact, and we kind of grew up and said, I'm not sure that's right. We have our myths. The United Colonists fought against tyrannical King George in the Revolution so that we could make a new form of government. That's a great story, but it's myth. The fact of the matter is, a third of the colonists wanted to revolt. A third of the colonists were happy to stay with the monarchy, and a third of the colonists did not care. There are all sorts of American myths about World War II and the importance of D-Day, but they've just become part of the fabric. And what happened in France is one of their national myths got challenged, and it got challenged by this movie. And the challenge was, the myth was of the united French resistance to the Nazis. Yes, the Nazis defeated us quickly, and they beat our army with their blitzkrieg techniques. But we were unified in resistance against them, and we did everything we could to undercut, and we helped the Allies out in a way that when they got there, it was much easier. And the vast majority of Frenchmen fought against the Nazis. And Marcel Ophuls, whose father Max Ophuls was a great French film director for a long time, decided to tackle this in 1969. 1969 was the perfect time to address this topic. Why? Because we were far enough away from it and we had enough distance that people weren't emotional enough about it as they would have been in the few years after the war, and they had enough historical context to place it in. So we were far enough away. We were near enough to it that the people who were the players were still alive and accessible. So he interviews. It focuses on this little town, Clermont, in the part of France that wasn't Nazi occupied. The Nazis occupied, the German army occupied the north of France, and the south of France was Vichy France, which cooperated to a certain extent under Marshal Pétain with the German government into 40 to 42. But it's all a question of how much are you resisting this Nazi rule, whether you're in the occupied area in the north or in the Pétain government in the south. And so what he finds is that, and he's interviewing, let me just be clear, former Prime Minister of England, former Prime Minister of France, resistance fighters, collaborators, Frenchmen who fought in the German army. Now think about that for a minute. Aristocratic Frenchmen who fought in the German army. And why would they do that? What you learn there is that their worldview is that there are two possibilities of the way this is going to play out. The communists are going to win, or the fascists are going to win. They didn't see democracy as an option. They didn't see monarchy as an option. They thought the wind was going to blow one of two ways, and the aristocrats certainly weren't going to become communists. So they interview a guy who's got a huge chateau and went over and flew planes against the Russians. And they interview resistance fighters who are the bravest people who ever lived, and it's just like you always hear about the guy who doesn't toot his horn loudly at all, is, still waters run deep. These two brothers who own a winery are just risking their lives, and they're just so understated. They ended up sent off to Buchenwald. They live, and I'll just never forget, one of the brothers says to the other, all he has to say about surviving a concentration camp is, yeah, that was no picnic. But all that's not the reason this movie's so special to me. All those reasons make it special. But the thing that makes it the most special is sort of the reason that All the King's Men is one of my absolute favorite novels. It's because it deals with the question of why are we here? What do we do? The great questions. And as you look at how these Frenchmen break out, there are heroes. And I'm just going to say it's 10%. These are 10% of the people who are risking everything in their lives and maybe their families' lives to fight the Germans. And they're collaborationists. And the collaborators, believe me, are more anti-Semitic than the Germans. They're making sure that all these Jews end up on the trains to the concentration camps. And in a very famous incident, the women who actually sleep with the German soldiers they dye their hair and cut it and parade them through the streets after the liberation, and some of them get tortured and killed. But there are vicious, anti-Semitic collaborators. I'm going to say that's 10%. I'm just making these numbers up. But the 80% in the middle, and this is where I think it really talks about the human condition. And there's a pharmacist on here who's brilliant at this and describing it. And I think it's what I would be. I think it's what most of the people in this room would be. Is some huge monster comes in and takes over. What do you want? Do you want to fight him and risk your life? Do you want to help him out? The answer might be neither one of those. The answer might be you want to save your family, and you want to make sure that nobody gets hurt. And so you're going to kind of go along to get along and hope this thing ends. And so in the end, I think this is a document about French people that, although it was resisted and the French government wouldn't let it be shown for years because it was breaking this myth, I think it really speaks to how the French are humans the same way everybody else is. So with all that, let's watch this clip.
France fell in 28 days, a victim of the Nazi blitzkrieg. A jubilant Hitler made his first visit to Paris at 6 a.m. the gift of his person, and the drama of collaboration and resistance began.
Les projets immenses, pour quelques jours, on les laisse filer. Cette brume n'est aux yeux d'un paradis, la sensible la France. Le cri ému qui ferme.
These are the faces today of leaders and followers, of brave men and cowards and men who did nothing. A French aristocrat who joined the Waffen-SS and fought on the Russian front. Another joined the resistance. A German occupation officer argues that the resistance fighters should have worn armbands.
All right, so give me the lights. So, this doesn't, there are different versions of it. The one I saw was, there's a 4.5 hour long version. I think that's shorter, but you don't want to miss a minute of it. So, we've got social injustice and sobering, compelling topics. We've got quirky microcultures and people whom we can learn from in these documentaries. And then the greatest of the documentaries, of course, are the ones that teach us things about ourselves. And that is session 5.